Did Mary Quant start silly fashion? Welcome to Mark and Pete. Here's a thought.
The miniskirt was for the fashionable extrovert and a 1960s style that was swinging with ease. But pride was hurt, and it was hard to flirt if you had two big knobbly knees. Yes.
Yes, you know.
Well, indeed, as you've seen in the news, Dame Mary Quant, who has died at the age of 93, designed originally in the 1960s the miniskirt, and also, famously, the patterned tights, hot pants, and plastic raincoats, which epitomise the look of the swinging London in the 1960s. The fashion took off from the catwalk and was put onto the streets, and many people wore these funny clothes. Clergyman Pete, I ask you, as a dedicated follower of fashion, what did you think of the fashion of Mary Quant and the influence on the high street?
Yes, looking back at it now, the clothes did look fatally ridiculous. That is to say, rather childish looking, I suppose, for adults to wear, with the bright colours and shorts that were too short, almost like a child's wearing them. And indeed, the fashion in women's figures was to be very slight and childlike, wasn't it, at the time, with Twiggy, the famous model, wearing the miniskirt and making it famous across the world. And it's this quaintness, silliness, ridiculousness of the fashion that highlights something about it. And, two things about it. One is that it's essentially ephemeral. It's something that passes. Of course, that's what I mean, the fashion of the time. And the second thing is that it's showing up something, actually. The fact that people wanted something so bright and cheerful, almost childlike, and also, though, sexualized, showing, I think, by the shortness of the skirt, showing off women's legs. It was almost like showing sexual availability of women. With the advent of the pill in the 1960s, this came to be somewhat true, at least in the popular imagination. I think for much of the population, nothing much changed then. But amongst your rich young partygoers in London, I think there was a change then. There was more of a feeling that women could be as sexually promiscuous as men and use it as a form of recreation. And that was reflected, I think, in the sexualized nature of these clothes. Worryingly, though, making them look like children who were sexually available. So there was something wrong going on in the culture there, reflected in the fashion.
Well, indeed, and many people will say that the 1960s was a sexual revolution. And what's interesting is there's a complete contrast to what we saw before. From a fashion perspective in the 1950s, often seen like Chanel and many others, and Christian Dior as sleek and stylish, Audrey Hepburn being a fashion icon of the time. And when we think about the 1960s, Mary Quant certainly captured a moment. And what's interesting is during interviews, she was actually sort of exploring really the background to this. And in an interview, she said, it was the girls on the King's Road who invented the mini, she said. And this is her speaking, I was making easy, youthful, simple clothes in which you could move, in which you could run and jump, and we could make them the length that the customer wanted. I wore them very short, and the customer would say, shorter, shorter. Well, how short could they have possibly have gone? At the end of the day, you may have worn nothing. But the fact of the matter is, it was definitely a very provocative time. But it didn't end there, did it, Clergyman Pete? Because as we move into the 1970s, fashions became even more absurd. Dare I say, and this is my opinion, and that is that whilst business definitely took off from the point of view of all the money that certainly there are lots of fashion designers and clothes makers made during the 1960s, including Quant herself. But in the 1970s, people then went on to flares. And that's where I would say that men started to become silly. The
Yes,
idea of
ridiculous.
flares flapping out across your legs, I'm sorry to have to say, as I recall, was completely impractical and somewhat downright dangerous, especially if you happen to find yourself being caught on
I have to say,
escalators.
even at the time, I thought it looked ridiculous. It
Yes.
was not just looking back on it. But there's something else that happened with fashion, especially for men during that period in the 70s, which was when we were first teenagers growing up together, and we, of course, were at the forefront of fashion at the time,
Oh, of course.
as listeners can tell.
You with the brown flares.
Actually, we're just on radio, but that's perhaps fortunate. But what you noticed is that men tended to be scruffy. In fact, you need to. If you looked neat, you looked unfashionable, and it wasn't until the early '80s with a sort of the change of people wearing very narrow trousers instead of the flares, very narrow ties, etc. If they're wearing a tie, and short gelled hair, people started to neaten up. It came out of the even more ridiculous punk clothes that were worn in the late '70s. The gelled hair at least. But men started to neaten up then in the 80s, as a reaction, I guess, to the scruffiness before. But what does that say? Taking on board what I was saying before, if you take that thesis as being accurate, I was really saying that fashion reflects what's going on in culture. And what does if women wearing short skirts? Yeah, it means they can be active, but they could have done that with simply having skirts that were loose. I think Mary Quant's idea that you needed a short skirt to be able to jump about is a bit of an excuse. You didn't need to wear something short. That was really to show the legs off. Come on, let's just be realistic.
Especially if you had two knobbly knees.
Yeah, well, of course, those who had slim, perfect figures, they looked good on. For most of the populace, it didn't. And looking at the development of fashion for men when they were becoming scruffy, you had to be scruffy to be fashionable. What does that say about what was going on in culture at the time? The messiness and lack of respect for authority, maybe. So, I mean, these changes are interesting. I don't think. I don't know if you agree with this, Mark, but I would say the fashion in itself, clothing fashion, isn't important in and of itself, but it does show something about what's going on in culture, much as as art form, art and music and other things going on in culture reflect it. I think clothes do as well.
I do, and then the interesting thing is that I'll sort of move on to the 80s because I have some comments about the 1980s. But going back to Mary Quant,
yes,
she wasn't just a pioneer in terms of the look of the dress and the cut of the dress, but also in the look of the woman herself. She had the bob haircut, very iconic in terms of the styling, particularly by her friend Vidal Sassoon, who was the hairstylist and businessman, made a lot of money out of fashion products and hair products, etc. Yeah. But what's interesting as well is that Dame Mary herself helped to develop the first waterproof mascara. And I'm sure that's something you're grateful for.
Yeah,
so the point here is that there was an entrepreneur that we saw there, somebody who saw a moment, reflected the culture. If you think of what was happening in music, and just the whole essence of innovation that we saw in the 1960s. We mentioned about some of the bizarre fashions of the 1970s, but to me, ironically, I think the 1980s was even more strange, partly for the fact that, had the big shoulder pads. They were in themselves very impractical. I'm sorry to have to say, from my recollection, that the clothes seemed to sort of take on a new dimension, a movement, beyond the individual who was the wearer. I just thought it was very strange, very sparkly. Men as well also had the strange sparkly suits, the Miami Vice look where you rolled up your sleeve. And Clergyman Pete, I'm sorry to have to say, I remember having succumbed to fashion on one occasion where I found myself wearing one of those on an occasion with yourself, I believe.
Yeah, I had one of those suits as well.
Completely impractical.
The rolling up the sleeves of the suit is a bit odd, but I quite like not the sparkliness of it, but I like the slim cut of the suit. But I just like things to look neat. But
Yes.
yeah, what does it say then if it's a reflection of fashion? And in the 60s, we have this sexualizing of women. In the 70s, we have the scruffiness of men. The 80s, it starts to neaten up, but becomes a little bit showy and surface with the sparkly suits. What does it say these days, the fact that there are so many
Indeed.
different fashions, completely
Yes.
eclectic, and no one knows what on earth is going on? What does that say about the culture
I
around?
think it's pretty succinct, really. I think it's reflective of where we are.
Yes.
I mean, I think it would be good to see, well, is there some edging which hopefully at some point will galvanise us and have something positive to sort of move forward. I wonder what our listeners think about fashions.
Yeah, well, do let us know. Just speaking to you, the listener, the way you can leave a comment is just go to markandpete.com and make sure you're subscribed. And if you are subscribed, you can leave a comment on this and every episode. Why not? So let us know what you think, which is the silliest decade for fashion, do you think? And which is your favourite, maybe, the favourite for fashion. But I think that just in conclusion, I would say, Mark, what we've got is fashion not in itself important to the extent that it's a waste of money, really, trying to keep up with the fashions. I think you can be persuaded that you need new clothes when actually the clothes from last season are just fine. So it can eat into your budget. But the other thing is
those pompous wigs that I used to wear in
the powdered
Georgian
wigs.
period.
I think they're yes. I think that they should
I like those.
bring those back. A sort of a restoration period of wigs would be great. But the other side of it is that it does seem to reflect what's going on in our culture. So let's have a look at what fashions people are wearing and see what it has to say. Can it give us insights into our culture, things to watch out for? But I guess that's all from Mark and Pete for this week. Make sure you keep up with the latest fashions, and we'll catch you again next time. Bye for now.